Hi there, I'm Judith. Brekkie is really glum today. We've been holed up. I was thinking about having you visit with me while I do the chores, but that might not be so fun. So I think I'll talk about surfing instead. Surfing. Crazy, huh? A gal's got a dream, but not so crazy when you consider this. One of the things that I find living in this little house is that when the options are fewer, sometimes that opens up a big magical world that you might never have experienced. Next thing you know, you're encountering new people, new things, coming across new adventures. That's what I want to talk about today. But that means I'm going to talk about surfing. So wax up, let's get paddling. Before I get going seriously, go ahead and click the subscribe button, and then I won't have to mention it again. And a like would be really handy for me because I need encouragement. I'm just getting started with this. Now I won't have to talk about subscribing again. Let me start my story mentioning where I came from. I'm terrified of water. And here I am talking about surfing. I'm terrified of water. Why am I terrified of water? I almost drowned when I was a kid. I have been on beaches where I've seen huge waves, or probably there were little waves, but they just look so huge. And I'm scared to death. I live in a landlocked state. There's no surf to speak of. But somehow that universe has pulled me in. I gotta be nuts, but yeah, I probably am. How did that happen? This is a sort of parable. It's an example, a little picture. I would bet many of you live in small towns. I do. And I live in the kind of small town that is a bunch of little villages. And historically, those little villages have been pretty much independent or quite far from each other. Now you just get in the car and go. But it didn't used to be that way, yes? Each of those little villages has a little library. Very sweet little library. Good place to hang out, get a read, meet some new people. Wonderful resource. Now, my town has to support all those little libraries. So each little library doesn't have a lot of money for books. And my town is not one of those wealthy towns. It's a workaday kind of town. Just a few thousand people. A couple of years ago and my whole life, I would go to the library regularly. And I mentioned little libraries. I had a favorite one, but all of them would have worked for my purposes. So I went to this little old-fashioned library. Teeny weeny, well, not teeny weeny, dusty books, musty smell. A lot of the books have been donated, but they're serviceable. I had one favorite shelf, though. Actually, not a shelf. It was one of those twirly things. It could only fit maybe 20 books or so. Yeah. It was one of those twirly things, and I loved to look at what was on that rack. Why? That was the new books. It only fit about 20 books, and it's almost always half empty. But anyway, I go to that rack, and here's what I find. I find that I have to stretch my head about what might be interesting. I'm not falling back into old grooves. I'm expanding my mind. I have to pick something that might only vaguely tickle my brain. And that's what I'll go home with. And I've gone home with some pretty strange stuff. I don't know if you know anything about the Kennedys. I know nothing about the Kennedys. But one day I went home with a biography of the Kennedy that had a lobotomy. I'm not kidding. And I read it word for word. I was kind of fascinated. But that's as much of the Kennedys I'd ever want to explore. Still, I had that experience with that shelf. One day I went into that little library and I looked at that twirly rack, I suppose it is. It only holds about 20 books. It was half empty that day. And I really felt that I needed to read something, but oh gosh, the selection. It was, shall we say, impoverished. I looked at that rack, and the only thing that I could even possibly relate to was a book about rogue waves. I'm not joking. I'll put the title in the description so you can see for yourself. It was a book about rogue waves. What are rogue waves? They're those colossal waves that suddenly lift themselves out of the ocean. Now, I know nothing about waves. The last time I thought about waves in any kind of academic way was in high school in physics, when we had one of those wave machines and we were studying waves, periods, and all of that stuff. You'd put your finger in it, it would make a bunch of waves, and then you'd measure them, like that. Maybe you remember that too. At any rate, I took that book out. That book about rogue waves. Moi, me, the person who's terrified of water. And big waves, oh my gosh. It was the last kind of title in the world I could possibly be wanting to embrace in my life. But I did. I took it home. I read every single word. I couldn't get enough of it. I really couldn't. So I read the sequel. I'm not joking. I read the sequel. And then, for some reason, the algorithms on my computer must have picked up that I was reading about waves. So then, of course, I was prompted to look at live streams of big wave surfing off the coast of Portugal, of all things. But I will tell you, I got so intrigued, I almost planned a trip to Portugal, at least in my head. There's a place on the Portuguese coast where the waves come up like this in front of the viewer, just because of the lay of the land of the coast. So you can be an onlooker and the waves are like this. And guys, it's very often fellas, are surfing down these absolutely colossal waves. I don't know, 90 feet, something like that. Scary as heck. Almost all of them fall over. And it's the miracle when they make it to the bottom and they're still in one piece. Anyway, I got so excited. Well, I think my computer must have got churning out new algorithms along surfing lines. And it encouraged me to watch a series on elite surfing. This sounds so strange, doesn't it? It happened that I had 3 months free Apple TV because I just bought a new piece of equipment. And Apple TV had this wonderful documentary on elite surfing. That's where the algorithm took me next. I watched that whole documentary. Oh, it was so fun. The personalities, the styles, the history, the dynamic. It was great. I binge watched. I watched the whole thing. And then, of course, I was at a loss for what to do. So what did I do? I started watching elite surfing on a regular basis. And I found that I could watch surfing almost any time of the year. It was great. I could be bored and almost always find a surfing competition to watch. I got away from elite surfing sometimes and looked at the younger surfers or the less qualified ones. I felt compelled to help them along and encourage them by watching. And I quite marveled. For decades, I had watched sports like figure skating. But lately, those sports have really changed for me. I find them tedious. I find the wrong things emphasized. I find them riddled with drugs. I don't trust any of the whole apparatus of the figure skating world. So that's where I was with the typical sports I might have been watching. So I had a mind that was open to a new kind of sport. There I was with surfing. And what did I like about it? There are a variety of things. One is that especially in the women's arena, it's developing really fast. The women are getting better and better and better right before your eyes. That is so fun to watch. Another reason I like to watch it is a kind of envy looking back on my life. I wish I had that kind of athleticism and confidence in my body and that ability to move. I wish. It's not something I have. I have other faculties, but that one, not so much. The most important thing to me is how surfers approach their waves. I see many surfers in all of those competitions act as though they're doing battle with waves. Truly, I get really bored with that. What I much prefer are those surfers who dance with waves, who move with the water, who read the wave as they go along, who can relax and take in the universe. Yeah, it looks like dancing on the waves. To me, that's the magic. That's something so special. It's a gift. It reminds me that that's where the gifts of the universe really are and what we can discover. In those quiet places, in staying in the moment, in the smallness of your world. That's how you can approach bigness. To get away from surfing for a moment, I will also tell you in my experience, you have to have a fairly solid base in your life in order for you to be able to choose little and have kind of a mind expansion. There has to be some kind of security beneath you. Otherwise, you're hard-scrabbling your way through your days. But in this case, those surfing competitions have brought me to so many different corners of the world, places I never even imagined. I'm not talking Tahiti. I've been to Tahiti. Not interested in going back there. I'm talking the Philippines, Indonesia, all kinds of places I never imagined even had waves. I mean, do you know Morocco has waves? Namibia, Peru. I never think of those kinds of countries or associate them with big surf or big surfing or having a community of surfers. I just think it's wonderful, and I want to visit so many of those. I see those beaches, and I want to go hang out there. In fact, if you're listening, World Surf League, and you're giving away free trips, I would so like to come along. I'd like to win one of those. Indonesia, that's what I have my eyes on. Go somewhere that I never imagined going. See what I mean? Having fewer options has this paradoxical effect of bringing you to a magical land where your head can be whirling. Imagination is firing. Your creativity is flowing. This is the spice of life, my friends, in my opinion. Have you ever had that happen to you? Where you looked at something and you thought, oh, I don't like any of those. And you were in a place where you just chose one. And then it turned out to be the most miraculous thing. Share that in your comments. I'd really like to hear. I bet some of you have experiences much like mine with the surfing theme. Oddball things you never imagined yourself doing or thinking about or looking at, but that are integral to your life. That's enough from me for now, but we'll talk soon, all right? See you then.